Hello, everyone, and welcome to our next DEY dialogue, Discussions in Defense of Childhood. My name is Denisha Jones, and today I'm joined with DEY's founder, co-founder, and president of the board, Nancy Carlson Page. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, that sounds so official, the president of the board. But okay, hi.
I love it, right? Yeah, it's super official. So we're great to have you on our third DEY dialogue. So we started these conversations just to really talk with a lot of our colleagues and comrades in the field about really important issues in just these brief conversations. And today we're talking about a not so happy topic, but something that we need to talk about, which is the science of reading. So we'd love to get your take, but we just want to remind folks that this is just a little bit of a preview of a larger conversation that we're going to have as part of our Summer Institute that starts next week, June 24th, from 4 to 6 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And Wednesday, our day 3, is our research into practice day. And so we'll be speaking to someone who's done research on the science of reading, as well as a practitioner and another teacher. And it's going to be a really great conversation. And we're framing that around threats to quality and how scripted programs like Science of Reading. So we hope you'll listen today, but please join us, register for the Summer Institute. So Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about what is the science of reading and why does it concern you?
Yes, you know, I've been in education for many decades, and from the time I came in 5 decades ago into education, there was what people called a reading war. And basically, it has cycled through over and over and over, and even existed before I came into education. Um, but essentially, it boils down to basically two essentially different points of view about how children learn to read, and I think even how children learn. Um, and the science of reading, and so the argument over this long period of time has basically been: do you teach children to read by directly teaching them phonics primarily,
Mhm.
or in a more experiential way where they would have experiences in a more activity play-based classroom where they construct understanding and reading is somehow part of a more holistic experience? That's a very simplified dichotomy there, but it's sort of a simplified description of a dichotomy that's existed for a long time. This particular cycle of the reading wars, that's now called the science of reading, because that's how it's being presented by the people promoting it, is the first time that I've seen one of these cycles not be based in arguments by researchers or educators, but instead by journalists and people in the media. And actually, if you dig into it the way I have really dug into it and read everything I can find, it's got a false foundation. It's actually built on nothing other than ideology and political opinion and a tiny bit of science, but not enough science to warrant applying. Even the people doing the science will say this: it's not credible enough or widespread enough science to be able to base any reading recommendations on it. That's a brain science, basically. So I would say it's built on a house of cards. And unfortunately, we're living in a time when I think everyone can understand and relate to the fact that information these days gets spread around. A lot of it's false. People don't dig under to find the real facts or don't have time. So science of reading legislation mandates have been passed in 38 states. And it's very scary because the same phraseology, like they say the old balanced reading is debunked science, that's not true. And the primarily phonics programs are evidence-based, that's not true. There's a very good book called Fact Checking the Science of Reading. You can get it as a PDF, so you don't have to buy it or buy the book online, but it's the best, most comprehensive thing I've seen that actually deconstructs all the arguments for science of reading and looks at what are the valid research points. And so anybody of interest, and I think a lot of our folks in DEY listeners may already be feeling the effects of it, which is being in situations where they're told that they have to use do certain instructional methodology, use certain curriculum that's based in science of reading. So, or they've even heard the term science of reading. But you know, it's very, very widespread, and a lot of legislators are just repeating the same phrases. So you know they've kind of almost been handed this script. It's even happening in my own state, sadly, of just repeating the same phrases about why the old methodology is debunked and the new one is better. And as I keep saying, it's just not based on real solid research.
Yeah, I love this whole, it's now it's science of movement, right? So now it's science of reading, and there's going to be a science of this and a science of that. And it's like, just because you put science in front of it doesn't make it valid, right? As scientists, as researchers, you and I, right? Like
Right.
it's sad to see what they're
Also,
looking at.
I do think the word science intimidates people to the extent that they don't question what is it,
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
and dig into it and just sort of assume, oh, if it's science, it's got to be right.
Yes. Right. And that's sad because we would hope so, but not necessarily if it's being used poorly, right? And not being used in the right way. And I'll definitely check out that book, and we'll add it to our resource list for the Summer Institute as well. So, what do you think will be the long-term negative effects with so many states legislating the science of reading, right? Especially in the early years, right? Why is this concerning, this idea that it's being mandated through legislation?
You know, that's a question in and of itself, Denisha, which is, should should instructional methodology and curriculum be mandated by legislators, by people who aren't educators? That's a different discussion, but it's a very important one. And
Hmm.
people aren't having that in the public sphere. Legislators are mandating curriculum and the science of reading, and they're debunking other curriculum, but it's not coming from educators. So that whole question of should educators be having to implement things that legislators tell them to do, because I think that undermines the professionalism and the background and the knowledge base of educators, who really should be in the front seat of deciding what to be doing in their classrooms and not being told. So it's kind of insulting out of the gate. But anyway,
Absolutely.
but the long-term effects will be, children are not going to learn to read any better and perhaps worse than they are now, because it's such a limited and kind of hard to relate to approach. Um, and, you know, kids are going to feel alienated by school, and especially kids. A lot of the methodology involves using kind of technical, culture and race free reading. So any children who have any identity that isn't just literal mainstream are
Mhm.
not going to see themselves reflected in the texts that the teachers are being required to use, and that is alienating in and of itself. And then also because it's much more of a top down direct teaching approach, children aren't going to be able to learn to read in a thriving, play-based, exciting environment where reading can actually be fun and integrated into a high-quality, play-based classroom. So I think overall, over time, by the way, the science of reading issue movement, it's called now,
Mhm.
um, is coinciding with this extremely conservative time in education that we're seeing. It's coinciding with book banning. It's coinciding with the legislation that punishes teachers for talking about race, ethnicity, racial justice, LGBTQ issues. And it's not an accident that it's happening alongside these other things. It's actually part of that conservative education movement we've been seeing for more than 20 years.
Yeah, I think that's so important to point out, right? Because if you're arguing against certain literature, then you got to control the whole thing, right? So you can't just ban books without then changing the narrative around reading, right? And so that gives those people a little bit more strength in their positioning, right? To not
Yeah,
only ban diverse books and books about different identities that kids need, but then to also structure reading so that it's just about obtaining information. There's no joy, there's no connection, right? I've heard they've removed, there used to be that text to self connection that teachers had to help, students make, and now that's gone. There's no text to self-connect. Don't see yourself in the book and the story. Reading is just to obtain information and knowledge, and not to feel, to not to, and I think that's part of that, right? And so you limit what children can read, and you limit children how to learn to read, and you're controlling everything to further a narrative that not we all don't agree with, right? Which I think is very challenging, and people need to be aware of.
Yeah, you get it. That's right.
Yeah. So we know that literacy and illiteracy is a huge concern. And that's another way that the science of reading movement is gaining steam. They're throwing out the statistics about illiteracy and people not reading. And even though those are aligned to faulty test scores, right? They're using the concern. And I've heard teachers say they don't feel prepared to teach reading, right? You and I both worked in teacher education. I still do, right? We understand that it's such a hard thing to do. I'm not saying, like, I don't tell my students, like, I can't tell you step by step how to teach a child to read because each child is different. I'm trying to give you as much information to help you, right? Kind of develop that. And parents are concerned too about their children being able to read and reading on grade level and those sorts of things, right? So can you speak to the parents and teachers who are concerned about children learning to read, and maybe share what do science of reading proponents get wrong about learning to read?
Well, first of all, basically, the science of reading approach is pretty much a one size fits all direct teaching approach. And not every child learns to read in the same way. There's a beautiful mystery about it because nobody actually completely understands how a kid makes those connections. So you want to give them all the information you can to be able to make the connections. Some children learn to read with never having learned any phonics. Some children have problems learning to read no matter what the instructional methodology is, and we have to acknowledge that they need additional help. And all kinds of kids learn to read in all kinds of ways. And also there's a lot of developmental concern here that you shouldn't be pushing reading too soon if kids aren't ready. So I think teachers need more what you are describing along the lines of a whole toolkit and a whole knowledge base of the variety of ways in which kids can learn to read and the variety of instructional methods, and also the children's development, so that a teacher can tune in to the whole class and each child and get a sense of where they are in the development of their understanding, and then give them the information that it's pretty clear they need. And in some cases, it'll be phonics. And there's nothing wrong with phonics. It's just that the science of reading is an approach that is basically over-focused on phonics as the single way to do it. And that's going to leave a lot of kids out who are learning in ways other than that and are using other kinds of information. You actually, the balanced reading that they keep saying is debunked, isn't debunked, and also it's a more holistic approach because it takes into account that children need a strong oral language background first. I mean, you can't learn to read words you don't know and you don't know the meaning of it. That's crazy. And they really, there's a lot of language information, like science of reading is focused on teaching rules of language, but you actually don't learn language by rules. Children learn to talk beautifully when they're 2 and 3 years old, and they never learned by somebody teaching them rules. Well, reading is actually that way too. You learn to read by reading, not by somebody teaching you grammar rules about how the letter Y sounds different in different words. You pick it up by reading and by seeing texts and by having experience with your own evolution of understanding symbols and how it relates to letters and sounds and the language that you know how to speak. So it's a very complex topic. And I think teachers need lots and lots of background and experience and knowledge, way more than we've given them up until now. And so I'm all for putting all the state money into professional development, but in a very broad way, not single focus like it is now on one single approach and one single set of instructional materials. That's going to leave a lot of kids out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen programs now, universities near me offering certificates in science of reading,
Yep.
school district my kids attend to, they're spending some of their federal dollars on science of reading. And Yeah, I fear that with that focus just on the skill of reading, we might have children who know how to read but don't want to, right? What about the joy and the motivation and desire to read? Like those are just as important because you can have the skill and you can know how to read, but actually not like it, right? Not want to, not care for it, other than when you have to, right? So I'd rather develop a motivated, engaged reader, someone who wants to read for knowledge, information, and to feel connected than someone who can read but is like, I don't like reading because it feels so laborious when you're just focusing on phonics and decoding and that sort of thing.
That's why you shouldn't ever take meaning out of reading, because meaning is where the joy is. If you, when you're talking, when you're writing, when you're expressing yourself, Denisha and everybody else who uses language in whatever form, it's the core of it. The thing that's bringing us joy is the fact that it's meaningful and it's our voice and it's our expression. And if we make it technical and we try to teach it as something separate from a whole person and their own meaningful expression, out of the gate, we're causing harm.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for our last question, what do you believe is the best way to support young children in learning to read?
You know, I looked back today at our first report from Defending the Early
Yes,
Years.
I love that one.
And it's still really relevant if people want to look at it online. It came out after the Common Core. So it was a defense against teaching reading in kindergarten. But it says, reading instruction in kindergarten, little to gain and much to lose. And it's very relevant still. And it does discuss our, I'm one of the three authors of it, but the DEY approach and the child development approach, and I would say the professional early childhood approach, early childhood education approach to teaching reading, which is to embed reading into the thriving activity-based, play-based classrooms that we envision and advocate for. And that means something almost the direct opposite of what Science of Reading is doing. It means connecting reading to a child's experiences in the classroom. So you have an attendance board with every child's name on it. And one of the things kids learn first is the names of all their friends and how to write their names. And then you have a job chart. And you have signs all over the classroom for the block area and the activity centers. So words are becoming part of children's actual experience first. Then we give them, in this kind of a classroom, a lot of opportunity to do symbolic creative work. So there's block building, and there's construction building, and there's drawing and painting. And when children, for example, when they do a painting of their mommy, of their house, of a flower, they are representing, these are symbolic representations. They're the precursors to reading because it's using symbols. Letters are conventional symbols. We all agree that a B is a B and a D is a D. And these, so we call them conventional because we agree on what they are. But leading up to it, we want to give kids lots and lots of experiences with symbolic representation, also through imaginative play. When you represent yourself as a dog in imaginative play, that's a symbolic representation. So all of these opportunities in a good play-based classroom lay the foundation for using symbols in a more conventional way. Developmentally, as a child gets there, it's not a foreign thing to look at letters and sounds. It actually connects to what a child has been experiencing all along in good early childhood classrooms. They've been doing a drawing and they dictate, before they can read and write, to the teacher what they dictated. This is my doggy Fido. This is my doggy Frank. And the teacher writes it out and shows the child what the letters are in relation to their drawing and painting, and reads it to the child. So for a child, written language is a natural extension of meaningful oral language and connects to it. So then all kinds of curriculum ways that teachers can continue that process. a lot of reading out loud to kids, reading big books to kids, but continuing to make it more specific that this written word is something that we want to master, but it's in the context of what children have been experiencing from the time they came into pre-K, and not something separate, not a different time, not a teacher there teaching a rule about how PH makes F sound, but rather in the context of how children learn best in a quality classroom.
I love it. It sounds like let children play and support their oral language development and their imagination, and the reading will come because it's part of that developmental process that children are primed to do. They're primed to learn, they're primed to speak, to make sense of the world, to understand, and they want to do that all day. And if we let them do it in their way, they're going to get there, right? They just need that constant, that connection. I love that, between the environmental print, the language that they're speaking, that they're telling stories, understanding that that's then transferred to print, and that print is that shared meaning. And yeah, it's such a, we've all seen it, right? We've seen that beautiful process of a child telling us a story, and we write it down, and they make that connection then to what they say, what they feel, to the words, right? And they kind of have to understand that that is the form of communication that we're talking about. And then they're really excited to tell you more stories and have you write down more things that they're saying, right? And to read those things.
Exactly. And for the number of children, it's not a big one, but the number of children for whom that isn't working well, a teacher notices it and gives them some very specific instruction in phonics and in meaningful reading. But some children will benefit from a little more focus on phonics, others won't. You can teach the whole class a little bit of phonics easily in the context of this kind of rich classroom we're talking about. And it's a part of what, and I think actually the more you do that, the fewer reading problems you're going to have anyway. If you pay attention to children's development and give them a lot of chance to symbolize and give them a lot of rich oral language and read out loud to them, I think the reading problems go way down anyway. But for the kids who need more specific instruction, I think teachers absolutely should offer it. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, it's like they're looking at a concern, even if, and I don't agree with the numbers because I think the standardized testing is a false measure, but even if we say 30% of the population is illiterate, and that's a stretch, I think, to say 30%, then why don't you just address a program to help those 30% and try to, instead of saying, no, we have to redo the whole thing because the 70% who aren't illiterate still need this new program. Like, why? I don't even understand the logic behind that, right? Yes, illiteracy is a problem. So why don't we target those people who are struggling to become readers and give them the support they need, not revamp the whole system for everyone when we don't know if it's going to work, right? We have there's no proof that this over phonics, actually there is research that says it doesn't work, right? To do all of over phonics and over scripted reading curriculum is actually not good science. So
we haven't actually talked about that, but yet the research shows actually the opposite of what they're doing, signs of reading, because we actually know from decades of research that phonics only programs do not work. Also, the testing is confusing, like you're alluding to people, because if you teach kids phonics directly and then test them on phonics, they're going to do really well because you're just testing what you directly taught, but it's not reading. And also that learning falls off after 2 years anyway. So those research findings don't hold up over time. But the testing has added confusion to this whole issue.
Absolutely, it has. And we're going to be talking about testing and science of reading and book bans and all of these topics in more depth.
And quality early childhood classroom.
Quality, yes, in more depth in 1 week. I'm super excited. Our 6th annual Summer Institute. This is really like the dream of mine. Like, I love these next 3 days. They're a ton of work, but it's when I feel most engaged in the work of defending the early years, to come together, to bring folks. We're talking about quality in early childhood. It's just going to be a great 3 days, as we know. And so I'm super excited, and we really hope that you will join us and listen to more about the science of reading from Nancy and the rest of our guests. Please don't forget to register, and we will see you on Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern for day 1. Thanks again, Nancy, for joining us, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks. See you next week, everyone.